Hello everyone, welcome back to the Midcast. This episode is going to be a little bit late because guess what started? College. Yes, I am finishing up my master's degree. I have this semester and the next one, and I will be done. And I should have no further interruptions except for work, a job. Hopefully. Employment is a hard thing to get these days, for me at least. But that is not the point of this podcast, so I won't rant about that. I will rant about something interesting for you to listen to. You probably heard today, or yesterday, or the day before, depending on when this goes out, that Valve, a large video game company, the same company that owns Steam, the video game platform, has had a huge repo leak. If you do not know what a repo is, it's like a large server that holds like archival information, so like unreleased content for games, unreleased games, concept art, the whole charade. Basically everything a company wants to archive for perhaps for their use later in the future or just for historical reasons. But Valve is not the only company that's had a huge leak recently. Lots of companies have been under fire, it seems. Lots of leaks, lots of just things that are coming out that are not supposed to be coming out. It's especially been happening the past month or so, especially the past 13 days of this year. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. The leaks that are coming out from these companies, these large deposits of information, data, is something newer. It's happened before in the past, but it didn't happen often. But recently, it's been happening almost every week, every month. You'll hear something huge come out, and that's not normal. It's certainly not normal, especially for these large companies with high-end security. It's not something that just happens. It's something that people need to work towards to, steal or leak out from these large secure data repositories. So, I'm going to start with Valve. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what leaked, because it interests me quite a bit. Some of my favorite games are in that, actually, including Team Fortress 2 and Half-Life. So, let's start with Team Fortress 2. Lots of concept art leaked, lots of designs that never came to be, lots of entire fully fleshed out concepts that were just never saw the light of day beforehand. A few of them we did know about. I think there was a couple of man versus machine, if that's a game mode where you fight against robots. There was concept art for different robots to fight, different things to build, upgrades, things of that nature. And it's strange to see how well conceptualized these were, and they did very little with it in the modern day release. There were several levels for Team Fortress 2, several maps that were also just completely unreleased, many fully fleshed out, full design art passes, so that art style is very consistent across the map. They were just left alone, untouched for several years, because much of the data in this leak is older. Older, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. I believe one of the maps was actually about 13 years old, so more than a decade. Which is hard to believe that they've had so much, they've hung on to so much of this. It did nothing with it. You'd think especially the things that they made that were almost done, like 90, 95, 98% finished, and they just left it alone? That feels like such a waste of effort and time for this company. And this company is sort of notorious for being strange in their operations. If you're not too aware, Valve is a work on what you want to work on kind of environment. It's a very loose, not really your typical corporate environment sort of workplace. And I do think that definitely works against what they produce. While what they do produce is very good, it would be better if there was more of it. And they are very uptight with what they release. And so much of it just ends up in a repo like this, and usually never seeing the light of the day. The public never gets to see it. But some very, how do I put this? Very rebel-like souls managed to leak it for us. I believe there is actually 3 culprits behind this huge leak from Valve. I do think Valve is aware of what happened, or who did it, which is, if you remember 2003, when Half-Life 2 was originally going to come out, I believe it was a Russian hacker got into Valve and managed to leak the entire beta version of Half-Life 2. And there was a huge, well, I believe he got arrested, but Valve was going to bring him to the United States and sue him, which was, that man dodged the bullet, because that was probably going to be one of the biggest lawsuits in video gaming history. But luckily, for him, he avoided it. And not to say what he did was good, I'm not supporting his decision, I'm just saying that if I was him, I would not want to be sued for $30 million, which is something I certainly do not have. But yes, I hope that these people, while they should get what is coming to them for, leaking confidential information, I only hope that, they don't get sued for $30 million, because that is a ridiculous sum for information that it isn't anything like Valve was actually going to release, right? I mean, it would be a different story if it was like 2003, where an entire game they were about to release got leaked onto the internet. Yeah, that's a different ballpark. This was data, concept art that was never going to see the light of day. It was never going to see, public release, anything. It was just going to sit there and rot away until the hard drives broke. So, I hope it's handled differently. I hope they get off a little easy. But there should be some sort of fine, obviously. You can't, law is law. You can't just let people slip by like that. So, I'll see how the story develops. On the next podcast, I will see if there's any, very interesting, relevant information. If not, you probably won't hear about it again. But I hope to God there's some more developments, because this is a very interesting story. There's lots of just crazy content you wouldn't believe. Like I was saying, just years worth of content that takes years to develop, just unused. But let's talk a little bit about how stuff like this happens, because I mentioned earlier that things like this, especially with large companies like Valve who use high-end security, this does not happen often. And when it does, it's a big deal. This is a big deal. It is not to be understated. Things like this usually happen because there is a vulnerability in the system or the service that they're using. Something was overlooked at some point and someone found it, and that was that. I believe it was a large cloud server service. I do not recall the name of it that Valve uses to store their data, their archival stuff. And there was obviously something that let slip a little bit, a password maybe, a port that was not properly closed off. Something was overlooked, and one of 3 of these people, I'm not sure if they're working together or not. This is still very fresh news, still only about a day old, which nowadays is maybe a little older than it was maybe 10 years ago, but this is still relatively new to me. So forgive me if I do not have all the facts, but yes, I do believe it was around 3 or so people who perpetrated this, and maybe all 3 of them, or just one of them, managed to find a way in. And they managed to just have full access to the data and downloaded all of it and started transmitting it over Discord, a social media platform, if you're not aware, where you can private message people, start big group chats, that sort of thing. And they were all transferred, I believe, using a file service known as media fire and just throw it all over Discord. I know people who I will not disclose that also have access to the data. I have viewed much of the leaked data myself, or supposedly I have. These things are very fragile. And it's very interesting stuff. And I do feel bad for Valve in the sense that they had this stuff slip right under their nose. And I can imagine how it feels to have something that you've worked on that you probably just didn't want people to see just spread like a wildfire across the internet. Maybe they weren't proud of some of the work, even though I think it's great. Maybe they did plan on using it one day, but they just weren't sure when, or if they had time, or whatever. Because, like I said, the environment is a very work on what you want to work on. So maybe they were just going to work on something else for a couple of years, and then come back to Team Fortress, or Half-Life, or what have you, and then re-release the content. So I do sympathize with that. It is an unfortunate scenario for them. I do genuinely wish them the best with just clean up, It's going to be a mess for them in the offices for a while. But Valve is not the only company to suffer such leaks recently. There's been lots of, I believe, Nintendo leaks. I'm not a huge Nintendo man myself, but I can appreciate that Nintendo is also a equally or even more so secretive company than Valve is. So having content from them get out is rough for them. It's probably a big hit on the integrity scale for them. Although I will say that while leaks are always a kind of a bad thing for a company, I do think for companies like Valve and Nintendo and the really big secretive companies, it's almost like a big boost in publicity, like in a public reputation, because people want these companies to talk. They want to know what's going on. And when people don't know what's going on, people perceive the companies as lazy, rigid, cold. And, well, yes, companies are cold corporate monoliths. That's what a company is. It's just a conglomerate of, lots of people. It's nice to see when they communicate with the community, especially. It gives them a little bit of relatability and humanity, and I think that is important for a business. If you do not have those things, people don't want to support the company. They have no reason to. They have no reason to have any feeling towards the company. And in recent years, Valve has been a very silent and cold and dead company, even though they're making billions behind the scenes with Steam. Many people just perceive them as just a rock in the video game industry. They just don't do a whole lot. 3 years ago, they released Half-Life Alyx, but that was a good boost. But it was a virtual reality only title, and many people, including me, do not have the time or money, or not willing to spend the money on a virtual reality headset, or may not even have the space to utilize it. I personally don't have too much room where I sit every day on my desk to edit these things or to play games. I only have maybe a couple feet at max, so a VR headset is just not a reasonable thing for me to have right now, which is unfortunate. It basically means I cannot enjoy Half-Life Alyx on my own. I would have to watch someone else play it, or wait several more years and avoid spoilers, which has already been a difficult task. I've done a relatively good job of remaining spoiler-free on Half-Life Alyx, but VR is just a hard sell for a lot of people. And for Valve, they want to move forward with virtual reality. They want to move forward with innovation. That's always been kind of their motto with Valve. Is they want each game to make a lasting historical impact. They want it to be one of the greatest games of the decade, right? But I do think there is a limit to that. I think if you wait that long and then release a title that's very inaccessible, even if it is revolutionary, it's not doing a whole lot for a lot of people. I guarantee you this. If Half-Life Alyx was a desktop title, something that you could just play on your computer, on your console without virtual reality, it would have been 100 times bigger than it was. And the fact that they basically said, if you don't like it, well, oh well, suck it up. That was their public statement to this. I just don't think that's a good way to run a company. I'm going to be real with you. Valve has, in my opinion, put basically a target on their back for this company is unreasonable and lazy. Even if they're not behind the scenes, even if they're doing hours of work per minute, behind the scenes, it's just, they're not showing anything. They're not talking. They're not doing anything. And there's so many indie companies these days, like New Blood, or just the indie developers, like the man who made Stardew Valley. He's coming out with a new game this year, where it's like you build a chocolate factory with ghosts. Like, these are games that people will look forward to, and they will communicate. The creators of Terraria, one of the biggest games on Steam, they communicate their updates. They tell you, hey, we're going to do a crossover with a different company. This is what's coming. This is what's not. And people love it. Terraria is, I think, the most highly rated game on Steam. And other games like Deep Rock Galactic, huge game, like 97% positive reviews, and they communicate. But when a developer does not communicate for years at end, and then they make a game, like the one game they do make is inaccessible, it just leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. It's not great. And I do realize I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent here. This isn't exactly the original topic of the video, but this is something that means a lot to me. It is something that I am passionate about. I do think companies, they owe it forward a little bit. They don't owe a whole lot. They owe it forward a little bit just to talk. Talk is cheap. Talk is effective. Even if they said something and it didn't come out, at least they said, like, that was what they had at the time. That was the ideas that were flowing through the company. So we get a status of what they're thinking about. When you don't know what they're doing, it's a loss. But back to the leaks, right? Leaks are a thing that's occurred in a company since the dawn of time. The Krusty Krab secret formula getting stolen by Plankton. That is a leak, in a sense. And it is a security issue, generally. Your passwords aren't secure enough. Like I said, the ports weren't configured. The firewalls weren't configured right. Something went wrong. Your information gets out. Oopsies. And it's something that's relatively unavoidable. You're going to have it one day at your company. And I think it's been happening more recently, especially these past 3, 4, 5 months, and then the past 13 days, because people working at companies aren't getting paid enough. They're getting disgruntled. Work environments have shifted since 2020 with all these things happening, the work at home, the remote, people preferring remote more, but then being forced to the offices. So not only, are people just kind of mad about things, they're upset about the work environment, they are scattering themselves, to say the least. They are, having to use more cloud services because they work from home and not on the company network. Some of them might not use VPNs, the passwords. It's when you have more endpoints to deal with at a company, you have a huge risk on your hands. Endpoint security is extremely important at a company. Because think about it this way, if you're not too familiar with security or what exactly I'm talking about. When, say you're a school of fish. This is going to be a horrible analogy, but this is the best I got on the spot. Say you're a school of fish, and then there's one hook. There's one hook, and there's like 100 of you. There's only enough room for one fish on that hook. That hook being the the problem, the vulnerability. But when there's it's like 10 hooks, there's more opportunities for the fish to bite. And when there's 20, even more. And then 100, then you got 100 fish, 100 hooks. That's 100 points of something going wrong. And it is up to the fish to know, hey, that's a hook that will kill me. So what I'm trying to say here is the more opportunities you give to people, to bad actors, to act upon something and then, ruin your company, leak information, steal information, sell your information, all of these horrible things, they're going to take it. They will take any desperate opportunity to just roll over your company. If it benefits them even in the slightest, even if it's an emotion gratification, they will take it because they can. It doesn't take a whole lot from anyone to really understand that even the slightest bit of motivation or reward will lead someone to do something. And like I said, the more opportunities you give them for that, the greater chance that something happens to your network, your company, etc. So, I'll leave you with a couple of questions. What do you think about video game leaks as a whole? Do you think they're fine? Do you think that they are, the people doing them should be arrested, be on site? Do you think that there's a bit of fairness to it, especially when companies refuse to communicate? What's your opinion on it? And if you are in the communities of any of the games I have mentioned who have suffered leaks, tell me about them. Tell me what you think. Just let me know, just general opinions. I'm very curious about what people have to say about these things. I love talking about them. If there are any questions in the comments, I will, respond to them in my next installment of this podcast. I am just so enthusiastic about things like this. It's been my life for more than a decade now. Security and video games. Big passions of mine. So I know this will be a shorter podcast, but like I said, I do have college. I do have a family to attend to. I have lots of going on. So I bid everyone a very good night, a good new year, since we're only 13 days in, and lots has happened. And I will see you in the next installment of the Midcast. Bye-bye.